So, you've heard of AI, you've tried things like chatgpt, you even get correct responses for simple things, but when you try to think of how to make your life actually easier at work, you don't know where to even begin, or you are frustrated by wrong answers, generic outputs, or a forgetful model that doesn't seem to remember what you said 5 minutes ago. If so, this video will help you. Hi, my name is Henrique, and I'm actually a research engineer in wastewater treatment. I have no background in AI development, although I do have tons of things to say about it and the limitations of LLMs, maybe in a future video. But I do have plenty of background in dealing with complex biological processes, systems thinking, and figuring out the thousands of ways something can go wrong before it happens. At my workplace, I am also the so-called AI champion, and I am responsible for helping my colleagues learn about AI and identify where we can integrate it into our workflows and tasks. And I am also a power user, having used dozens of models and prompted these systems thousands of times since 2023. This presentation is my attempt at trying to help the biggest amount of people at once, not knowing specifically what you work with or the type of tasks that you deal with every day. Therefore, this will still be slightly general information, and it's up to you to take it from here and use it as inspiration to apply it in the specific ways that you will identify. If this video resonates, then I can make more specific videos covering some use cases and workflows that I do or have helped others identify, like better searching for job opportunities, researching topics or markets, better task decomposition, etc. One last thing, I also assume you have access to some internal AI tool at your work, or the work that you are trying to do with AI is not sensitive as per your company's policy. Be careful what you feed these models. Let's begin. So, one could almost say we're kind of in a brave new world now that we have all these AI tools. We are in a world that is basically filled with infinite, limitless, plausible-looking text and code. And now we have two alternatives, more or less. The first one is that we drown in slop. This is low-quality digital content often produced in large quantities by artificial intelligence that lacks depth or value. This was the word of the year last year, by the way. Or the other option is that we humans provide direction, judgment, taste, values, relevance, curation, implementation, alignment, specification, and wisdom. Let's go with the last option, shall we? So I'm assuming you already know a little bit about LLMs, AI. You covered more or less the basics, what to type to get something useful out of it. And also you have some idea of what an LLM is, how do you define it, what the different types are, and how to do a basic prompt, how to get some answers that are actually useful. Could be solving a technical problem with your computer, could be figuring out a recipe, for example. Basically these one-shot, as it's called, questions, where you get the answer you look for immediately in the first result of the LLM. And you deal with it basically like, help me with this X problem, and you get the answer. But what we're trying to do today is to go to the next level, right? How to understand actually how these LLMs think, how to engineer prompts, not just prompts, but prompt systems that are reliable and you can get use for it for your work every day. Getting reliable answers that are reliable no matter what you ask, how you ask it, because you've already know enough intuitively to ask the question in the right way. And instead of just having the answer immediately in the first prompt, instead we might need more than one prompt in a sequence or in parallel to get to where we need to go. So instead of just relying on the LLM for helping with X, instead you approach it like, here's my process for X. And my philosophy here is that we're trying not just to use AI to do more, just to do more things, to get overworked, to drown in work. We're trying to learn how to use AI so that we can do more if it's needed or useful and possible. But also, if by using AI we get some more meaning out of our own work, because maybe we focus on different parts of work now that other more boring parts are dealt with. and we can free some cognitive space as well, so that yeah, for our curiosity, for exploration, and for the work that actually energizes us instead of drains our energy. um, so that's the goal as I interpreted it, and if you resonate, then keep watching. So yeah, the idea is not maximum productivity, but to maybe make our work even more sustainable in the way that we can keep doing it longer and better, and maybe make it even enjoyable for us if it isn't already. So what we'll cover today is these more or less 7 topics. We'll start with how LLMs actually work. So shifting your mental model of how you may be perceiving LLMs to work right now. The 6-element prompt framework. You already probably know most of this by now, but it's good to recap just in case. Advanced techniques. This is when we start going into some things you may not know. Workflow design, task decomposition, quality control, also very important for reliability of using AI. And lastly, some practical applications to ground you into how to begin using this thing now. But importantly, don't focus on memorizing what I am providing right now. All these materials and examples, I provide a link to them so you can view them later in the description. It could be the presentation or notes or whatever, but focus right now as I walk you through this to reason with me, to follow the logic of what I'm explaining and understand the hows and the whys and not so much the what, if that makes sense. So how do LLMs actually work? Well, the wrong mental model that most people have, and this is the majority of people, is that LLMs are a glorified search engine that retrieves stored information, basically a slightly more powerful Google. The right mental model is that LLMs are a pattern completion engine that generates probable continuations. Big scary words, huh? What this means, that what this matters for, is that LLMs don't know things. They predict what comes next. In this case, they try to predict what comes next in a word. So you give it a prompt next, let's say, and it tries to generate what is the most likely words and sentences that follows through the user prompt. So the quality of the output depends on how you set up the input pattern. And you're not really asking a question to the LLM, you're providing a template for it to complete for you. So here's a little bit of an example of what I mean in the image here, of how these large language models or LLMs work, in case you didn't quite get it from this explanation. So what does this mean for how LLMs actually work and the implications for your prompts? If LLMs are a pattern completer, then you should help it complete the pattern, right? Sounds obvious, but follow me here. So if they should continue patterns, you have to provide those clear patterns for it to continue. If they follow context cues, you have to give the explicit context and role for it to follow. If they aim for the most likely, the most probable output that might match the user's request, then you have to constrain the possibility space so that it's less likely and more precise to what you need. And if LLMs can be inconsistent, that means you have to build in verification steps. So the key insight here is that the more structure you provide, the less the LLM has to guess. And guessing is where the errors happen. So what are the parameters that you control when you interact with the LLMs? You might already know some of these, so I'll try to be brief. But basically, you have the temperature and creativity. This is arguably the least useful one, the one that you will deal with the least. If you have a low temperature or low creativity, the response of the LLM will be focused and consistent. And if you have a high temperature or creativity, it will be very varied and exploratory. By default, most models have it set to 1, right in the middle, so it's a perfect balance of focused and consistent, but also varied and exploratory. What actually matters more for us in this case is the context window. This is how much information the LLM can see at once. It can be in the form of the prompt that you write or the documents that you attach and ask for it to read. So if you have a lot of stuff that you added, it will overwhelm this context and it will start forgetting things. So this is why it's important to manage the context in some way, to keep it short and concise in some cases, and sometimes to move to a different chat, or to try to build in a workflow that takes into account that it might get overwhelmed at some point. And then you have instruction following. So modern models, modern LLM models, are trained to follow structured instructions. So a practical tip here is that when you want consistency, like reports and analysis, you can be more specific and constrained in your prompt. And when you want ideas and brainstorming, things of that nature, you can be more open-ended on the way you phrase your prompt. So the 6-element prompt framework, or the anatomy of a professional prompt, let's say, means that every effective prompt can include up to these 6 elements. This is the role. Who is the LLM in this interaction? The goal. What specific outcome do you need from the LLM? The context. What background information matters for the LLM to achieve your request? The format. How should the output be structured so that it's most useful for you? Examples. What does good look like, so the LLM can have some idea of what you're looking for? And constraints is what should be avoided or limited. What does not good look like, right? So you don't always need to add prompts that have all of these 6 elements, but knowing all 6 helps you diagnose when prompts are bad or are failing for you. So let's go through these one by one. And again, you might know some of these already, so feel free to skip ahead. But yeah, first element is the role, right? What it does is that it sets the LLM's perspective, vocabulary, and approach. So examples could be like, you're a senior project manager reviewing this proposal, or you're a technical writer creating documentation for non-experts, or you are a financial analyst identifying risks in this report, etc. Why this works is that the LLM adjusts its language, depth, and priorities based on the role that you tell it to assume. And the common mistake here that most people do is that you skip the role and you get just generic and unfocused responses that then give you a lot of more work because you have to edit all of that by hand, right? So try to remember this, right? And why it works. Next, we have the second element of the professional prompt, the goal. So what it does is that this defines the success clearly for the LLM. So a weak goal could be like you write your prompt and you say, just help me with this presentation. You give the presentation and you ask it, help me. A strong goal might be, you can write specifically, create a 5-slide outline for a client presentation that explains our Q3 results, emphasizing the 15% efficiency improvement. Notice here how you needed to know a lot of these details beforehand, right? And therefore you have to convey that and tell that to the LLM so that it will give you what you need a bit more in a more useful way. So the test here is that could someone else verify if the output achieved the goal? Someone that maybe doesn't have all the information that you have, but knows enough about what is needed that it can tell by reading the response, oh yeah, this will work. I can send this to whoever needs it at whatever department. Then we have the third element, or context. What it does is that it provides the information that the LLM needs to work with. So there's different types of context. This could be background information. For example, this client has been with us for 3 years and recently expanded operations. It could be document content, where you attach or paste relevant text. It could be a situation, like you might write, for example, we're responding to a complaint about a delayed delivery. Or it can be constraints from reality, right? So you could say, the budget that we have for this is 50,000 and the timeline is in 6 weeks. So the rule here to remember is that if a smart colleague would need this information to help you, so does the LLM. Otherwise, it's just going to guess on the most likely and probable thing you might know. And sometimes it might guess right, but more often than not, it might not guess right. So you need to help it. The fourth element is the format. And what it does is that it specifies exactly how you want the output structured. So some examples is that you might want it to respond in bullet points or with a maximum of 5 items. if you're condensing information, for example, or you wanted to create a table with columns with the issue, the impact, the recommendations for that specific request you're asking. You can maybe ask it to write in an email format with the subject line and a formal greeting, or you might ask it to provide your answer as a summary with 2 sentences or details in 3 to 5 bullets, and next steps as a numbered list. So this matters because you'll spend less time reformatting and you can use the outputs immediately. So we're trying to save time here as well, right? That can be useful. Fifth element is the examples. So what it does is that it shows the LLM exactly what good looks like, so it doesn't have to guess. So this is most useful to use when the format is unusual or not so specific, or it means it's specific what you need, but it doesn't know that, right? When the tone or the style matters, and when you've had trouble getting the right output before. So a power move here for you to remember is that use one of your own best outputs as an example to help it maintain consistency. That way you also don't have to edit everything afterwards. And the final element of the 6-element prompt framework is the constraints. And this tells the LLM what not to do, very specific. Some examples can be, do not include pricing information, keep the response under X amount of words, avoid technical jargon because the audience is not non-technical in this example, do not recommend options outside our current service offerings, or if the information is missing, ask for clarification rather than assuming. So the key insight here for you to know is that LLMs often over-deliver or go off track, and these constraints help keep it focused. So when you try to put all of this together, right, you have this basically. Here you have all the different elements as a template that you could just, for example, copy, paste, and start editing specific things for you to start working on that, right? So this is something that I can make available for you, and you can just begin, or you can just reference as a starting point. And now we start going into advanced techniques. So sometimes basic prompts still fail, even though they're well structured, or you were careful to do some of this 6-element framework, because you can still get something called hallucinations or confabulations. This is when the output of the LLM is confident but wrong information. You might get inconsistencies as well. This is when there are contradictions within the same response. You can also get drift. This is when you started focused, but then the LLM started wandering off topic. And this can happen when the context is very long, for example. So one of the things to keep in mind. And then you can also have superficiality. This is when the output is technically correct, but missing the depth that you need. So the solution here is to layer in techniques that make the AI check its own work. So the first technique is the so-called chain of verification. What it is that it forces the LLM to generate, critique, and revise before giving a final answer. And here's an example of how to use it. So you would have your main request, your original prompt, and then afterwards you would add something like, after providing your initial analysis, number 1, list 3 ways your analysis could be incomplete or wrong. Number 2, for each, check against the provided information. And number 3, provide a revised analysis addressing any issues found. A useful place to use this would be when you're doing contract reviews or financial analysis or technical documents or anything where mistakes are costly. Another technique is the self-review prompt. So what this is that it asks the LLM to evaluate its own output against your criteria. So again, as an example, you have your prompt again that you've made, and then afterwards you would add, before finalizing, check your response against these criteria. Did you address all the parts of the question that I had? Is the tone appropriate for the audience? Is anything unclear or could be misinterpreted? Are there any claims that need verification? If there are any issues, revise accordingly. Another technique is structured thinking for complex problems. So here we're trying to force step-by-step reasoning through structures. Most modern models already do this, but sometimes it's good to remind them of this. So instead of just typing, what should we do about this problem, and you add the problem, you might type something like, analyze this problem that you have pasted using the following structure. Step 1, define the core issue. Step 2, identify the key stakeholders affected. Step 3, list possible approaches, minimum of 3 for example. Step 4, evaluate the pros and the cons of each. And step 5, recommend an approach with reasoning. And this works because it helps the LLM, or this structure forces it more or less, this sequential thinking, rather than jumping to some potential conclusion, because it yearns, in a way, to get to the bottom of it as fast as possible. So by forcing through these steps, you're more likely to get better results. One more technique is the multi-perspective analysis. And this is when you have the LLM consider multiple viewpoints before concluding your request, basically. So an example is that you have a proposal that you've added as a prompt or as a document, and you would type also in the prompt, analyze this proposal from 3 perspectives. And again, all these examples you can edit. I'm just trying to show you the structure and how to think about these problems and the organizing and architecture of the prompt. But yeah, analyze this proposal from these, in this case, 3 specific perspectives, which are the financial perspective, focus on costs, ROI, budget impact, operational perspective, focus on the feasibility, the resources, or the risk perspective, focus on what could go wrong. And after analyzing all 3, then you ask the LLM to provide a synthesized recommendation of all that addresses basically all these 3 perspectives. And you would basically want to use this when you're trying to do complex decisions, stakeholder communications, strategic planning, things of that nature. Another technique is the prove it prompt, more or less. Here you ask the LLM to provide evidence for its claims. So with any prompt that you have, it could be analytical, for example, you would type something like, for each recommendation or conclusion that you provide, cite the specific information from the provided documents that supports it. And if you cannot cite specific support, note that that point is based on general knowledge rather than the documents. So this works because it helps reduce the hallucination by forcing the LLM to ground claims in the provided content. So we've had some initial advanced techniques, and now we start to go into something that we call meta prompting. So the definition is to use LLMs to improve how you use LLMs. And the insight here is that because the LLMs have been trained on thousands and thousands of examples on effective prompting, you can just ask it to help you prompt better. And 3 applications that we'll cover here is reverse prompting, where the LLM writes the prompt optimization, where the LLM improves your prompt, and prompt debugging, where the LLM diagnoses why a prompt failed. So let's start with reverse prompting. When you just don't know where to start, you have no idea, just start with the following example. You tell it to the LLM, you are an expert prompt engineer. I need to, and then you describe your goal, no matter how vague or specific you need to. Write the single most effective prompt that would make an AI produce excellent results for this task. Consider what context would be essential, what format would be most useful, what constraints would prevent common errors, and then execute that prompt. And this is best for unfamiliar tasks, like when you're stuck exploring what's possible, things of that nature. Here another example is prompt optimization. When you started writing a prompt, a draft of a prompt, let's say, that's okay but not really great, you could type something like this. Here's a prompt I've been using, and you paste your current prompt. The outputs are, and then you describe. Maybe it's too vague, maybe it's the wrong format, maybe it's missing depth, etc. Improve this prompt by identifying what's missing or unclear, adding necessary structure or constraints, and rewriting it for better results, and then provide me the improved version. So yeah, this is a way to improve your prompts, and then you would take that output and put it in a different chat, for example, um, so you could get going with your work. Then you also have the prompt debugging. When a prompt keeps failing, for example, you might type something like, I use this prompt, and you paste your prompt, and I got this output, and you copy and paste the output of the LLM that you got that you were not happy with, and then you write, I expected, and then you describe what you expected. Diagnose why the prompt didn't work as intended, and suggest specific fixes and improvements. Here you can also do something called the clarification technique. And this is a very powerful technique that I use very often. So when you're not sure what the LLM needs, just ask it for clarification. So it sounds simple, but let's reason through this, right? So you would type something like this. I need help with, and then you describe generally the task. Before we begin, ask the LLM, so you would ask the LLM, what is the additional information that would help you, the LLM, provide me the best response? Are there any ambiguities in my request that you like clarified? And what assumptions are you making that I should confirm? So this works in two ways. First, it surfaces gaps in your prompt before you get a bad output, but also it makes you be more specific and also might even solve some uncertainty you have in your head about the task that you wanted to do or the response you were looking for. So it's powerful, and I recommend using it whenever you can. So we've done advanced techniques, meta prompting. Now let's start thinking about workflow design. So instead of just doing and thinking about single prompts, right? You go to the LLM and you ask, generate the report, and then you get something that doesn't really work for you. Let's try to think about maybe we need different prompts after each response. For example, you might need to extract key data from the documents and then identify the 3 most important trends from that, and then to draft an executive summary focused on those trends, and then review the draft for accuracy against the source documents, and finally to format for final presentation. So the key shift here is that you should be, all complex tasks basically should be broken into steps and not crammed into one prompt or one conversation window. Again, so we don't overwhelm the LLM. So here are some examples just to give you an idea. And again, don't worry about remembering or memorizing this. Just follow me through line by line about what I mean and why it might be working. So step 1, let's say you want to generate a structured outline, right? So you would type something like this. Create a detailed outline for, and then you would type your task or attach your task. Include main sections, key points for each, and what information analysis each section needs. Don't write the full content yet, just the outline. Then you get an output from the LLM, and you will review and adjust if it's needed, the output, and in this case the outline here yourself. And then you would execute section by section. So then you would type, maybe in the same chat or in a different chat, using this approved outline, and you would paste the outline, write section 2, and you would type the title of that section, and then include, and you can add specific details for that section. So here, this works because you are in control of the structure and the LLM is handling the writing, which is basically where we want to be. Another chaining pattern here is the extract, analyze, synthesize. So step 1, we begin by extracting. For example, you add documents, could be PDFs, could be Google Docs, could be Word docs, could be sheets, something like that, presentations. So you would type a prompt like this. From the attached documents, extract all the information related to the topic that you're looking for, and then list each point with its source document. Then a separate prompt would be to analyze, right? So you would type something like this. Based on this extracted information, and you paste the extraction results from the previous step, analyze for key patterns or trends, contradictions or gaps, implications for your purpose, right? That you know what you need. And lastly, you would have step 3 to synthesize. So then using this analysis, and you paste the analysis from step 2, yeah, then synthesize the information. So simple. Another workflow design here is the so-called draft, review, revise. So first you start by asking to generate a draft, and here you might have the 6-element prompt, for example, to get a rough draft of what you want for the task. And then you, as a step 2, different prompt, maybe different chat even, you ask the AI to self-review. So you add the draft you have, and you tell it, review this draft against these criteria. Accuracy, are all the facts verifiable? Completeness, are all required elements present? Clarity, would the intended audience understand easily? And tone, does it match the required style? Identify any issues. And then you revise, basically, right? So based on this review, and you paste the review from step 2, you ask it to revise accordingly. So over time, as you start doing this exercise yourself for your specific work tasks, you start developing reusable workflows that you can just copy paste, or you know where to find them easily, instead of having to reason through all the time what is relevant, how should I chain these steps, what would be important in each step, etc. So you might start identify things like document summarization, where you identify the pattern. Okay, I extract, I verify the key points, I format, I make a summary. Report writing might be something like, I have the outline, I do a section by section, I do a review, I do a polish. Email responses, meeting prep, proposal review, etc. So you have examples here, right, of how you might do things. But again, I don't know what you work with specifically, so you'll have to think a little bit. What do I work with more that I could start thinking about designing my own workflow, right? And I know that already at our works, we do a lot of these workflow intuitively, but it's useful to write it down, even if not for the LLM, just for yourself, so you can understand also the bottlenecks, right? So now we go into task decomposition. So the idea here is that now we're kind of basically managers in a way, right? We have to start thinking about how to delegate tasks effectively, how to break a task into pieces. And this would be the same if you were trying to give the task to a capable but inexperienced colleague. And this is also needed for LLMs, because they struggle with tasks that require multiple types of thinking, or that they have implicit dependencies between the steps, and tasks where context from step 1 is needed in step 5, for example. So the signs that you need to decompose is when you're getting outputs that only address part of your request, when the LLM seems to lose track midway through the request, when the results are superficial despite you having detailed prompts, when you keep having to ask follow-up questions to get it right, and when the task requires more than 2 or 3 distinct cognitive activities. So the framework of how I would get you to think about this is that for any complex task, ask the LLM, or yourself first even, what are the distinct activities that you're doing? So is it just research, or is it research, analyze, calculate, write, review? What dependencies exist as well, right? Maybe step 3 needs input from step 1, for example, and that's not immediately obvious. Another question you should ask yourself is, where do I need to verify before proceeding? So what are the critical decision points in this workflow or in this task? And then what can you run in parallel versus what is sequential? And then you design prompts for each distinct activity. So our original task, and here's an example of a decomposition. You might have an original task like, help me prepare for the quarterly business review meeting. And you start thinking, okay, what does that mean? If I were to try to teach somebody from scratch how to do that, maybe I would tell them, okay, first step, you need to look at the reports and extract key metrics, for example. Then you would have to compare against the previous quarter and the targets that we had set. Then you would have to identify or find 3 or 5 key talking points, like this could be wins that were achieved or concerns that have remained. Number 4, you might try to anticipate, right? What questions might you get from leadership based on these results that I'm seeing? And you might prepare as a next step some responses to these anticipated questions. And lastly, you might format everything and create a meeting agenda with the timing. So another example of task decomposition is the least to most approach. So when you have problems that build on themselves, you start with the simplest subproblem, you solve that, and then you use that solution in the next problem. So if you're doing, for example, complex analysis, you might begin with something like, first, list the key data points in this document, then using those data points, identify the 3 main trends. Then for each trend, you analyze the causes and the implications of each trend. And based on all the above, what are the strategic recommendations that you should, take into account? So each step's output is becoming the context for the next step, if that makes sense. And then we also now arrive at quality control. So LLM outputs, as no doubt you might have experienced yourself, can be confidently wrong. This is when hallucinations are stated as a fact. They can be subtly incomplete, so they are missing key considerations, and they can be contextually inappropriate, so they are technically correct, but wrong for the situation, right? And your job here is to build verification into your process and not just after it. So what do I mean by that? So, for example, we might start with this quality control layer 1, where you have built-in verification. So in the prompt itself, you add the instructions to verify. So for example, you might have your long prompt with your main task, and then at the end, you add something like quality checks before finalizing. Are all claims supported by the provided documents? That no information has been assumed that wasn't given? That the format matches the specified requirements? That the tone is appropriate for the audience that you would type, that would be reading? If any of these checks fails, note it and explain what additional information is needed. Then you might have a quality control layer 2, right? The self-consistency check. So for important outputs, you have the AI check its own work from a different angle. So for example, you start by typing something like this. You just produce this output and you paste the output. Now, as a critical reviewer, identify, number 1, any claims that aren't directly supported by the source material. Number 2, any logical gaps or assumptions. Number 3, any potential misinterpretations of the original request. Number 4, anything a skeptical reader might question. Be thorough. It's better to overflag than to miss issues. And you can also use different chat instances or even different LLM models or versions of the model for this to get that different angle and different perspective that might be useful for you, right? So then we might have something like a quality control layer 3 where we're working with explicit uncertainty. So here you try to train yourself to ask for confidence signals. So you might have your request, your prompt in the chat, and then you type something like this. For each major conclusion or recommendation, rate your confidence, high, medium, or low. If medium or low, explain what information would increase the confidence and why. And if you're uncertain about anything, say so explicitly rather than guessing. Then, as a quality control layer 4, we might consider something like source grounding, right? So when you're working with documents, you might start, for example, requesting an analysis of the document, and then you would type immediately after your prompt, important, for each point in your response, indicate which source documents it comes from. Use this format, for example, your point, the source with the document name and the relevant section, and then you would add something like this. If a point is based on general knowledge rather than the provided documents, note that, right? So you would add source, general knowledge. So this also helps you later debug, right? Okay, maybe the LLM here didn't really use the document, but it should have used the document. Instead, it relied on general knowledge. So it helps you find out where there may be a problem later on. So here's basically the checklist that you have to keep in mind, the human verification checklist, so to speak. Always remember to verify LLM outputs yourself. And this you should verify for factual accuracy, right? Can I verify these specific claims that the LLM wrote? You can verify for completeness. Did the LLM address everything I asked, or did it miss something? For appropriateness, would I, human, be comfortable with a colleague seeing this? Or would I be embarrassed? Or would I be scolded for what I shared with them? Context fit. Does this make sense? This meaning the prompt, the result you got from the LLM. The output of the LLM makes sense for our specific situation? Or is there something still missing? Some intuition I still have, but I don't quite know yet that is missing. And then actionability. Can I actually use what I got from the LLM as is, copy paste, or does it still need some work? So train yourself to remember this and verify this. And yeah, remember, these now are the non-automatable skills required to effectively manage and guide this AI collaborator to a successful outcome. We as humans now uniquely provide the direction, the judgment, the taste, the values, the relevance, the curation, the implementation, the alignment, the specification or intent, and the wisdom or the embodied taste. So this is our edge now, basically. This is our specialty, so to speak. Right, so now moving a bit more into practical applications. To make your life a little bit easier, I'll probably make this presentation itself available in the description below, along with some examples that I've already prepared. These are prompt engineering and optimization, document analysis, meeting task and management, strategic analysis, etc. It will be in the link below. So just to make it easier for you to copy paste what you need if you're not sure exactly. If you don't want to be going back into the video and typing things by hand, it's all available below for you to work with. But more importantly, let's try to think, because again, I don't know exactly what you work with, how you might maybe integrate what I've taught you into your workplace and your workflow and your tasks. So let's try to reason a little bit together here. How would you apply this to your work, right? Let's consider maybe tedious work. Ask yourself, what tasks am I reluctant to do or feel low energy about on any given day? Where do I write similar things repeatedly? And what involves a lot of translating and reformatting? Here, translating, I don't mean language necessarily, but shifting the structure or shifting the format from one way to another. It can be taking a memo and expanding on that, or maybe taking a long context format and maybe summarizing it into bullet points. And about bottlenecks, right? What slows you down the most on a typical day? Where do you get stuck synthesizing information from multiple sources? And what takes longer than it should? Like intuitively, we have an idea of this shouldn't be taking so long, but it's taking long. So maybe I can note it down for reference. And then about quality, what would I do better if I had more time to think, right? And where would a second opinion help? So these are some of the questions that I encourage you to write down, or at least think deeply, so that we can identify, or at least you can identify specifically, okay, maybe here I could use AI. So my little challenge for you is that you pick one task from this reflection that you hopefully have done by now, something that you might do regularly, and to describe what inputs do you have and what outputs do you need, and what's tedious about it, if anything. And then to try to design a prompt using today's framework with all the things you have available for, including more things available in the description. and then to evaluate honestly. Did this save time at all? Energy? Did the quality improve? Was it worth the setup effort? And share in the comment what works or not. But most importantly, remember, not every task is a good fit for LLMs, and that's useful information too. So let me leave you a little bit with a final thought. Prompt engineering, right? Manipulating the words that we send to the LLM so we get a useful output. We need to kind of think and treat the LLM like a capable but very literal-minded colleague who needs clear instructions, relevant context, and explicit expectations. So the goal here is not to learn magic words, but to develop the habit of thinking clearly about what we need and communicating that precisely, whether it's for the LLM or the colleague next to you, and that the LLM is only as good as your ability to direct it. That's basically the main takeaway to remember here. And a little bit of a curiosity before we end. If we think about the past, the present, and near future of how we've been dealing with these LLMs, we started in early 2023 with basic chatbots that would answer questions from memory. And so this meant that you could get questions from memory, you would ask questions, get text answers, but they might be wrong. By mid-2023, we were able to attach documents, so the AI could read our files, and you could ask things like summarize this PDF or analyze this spreadsheet. Most people are still stuck more or less in this level, by the way. By late 2023, we started having what's called custom bots and knowledge bases. So these are AIs where you don't have to keep attaching the documents. It knows the documents already, the specific company documents, for example, and you have built a company expert for specific departments or for specific tasks even. So that saves you time in having to attach the document over and over again and having to make the prompt over and over again. Still, this is available in many models, but not all models. By 2024, we started having what's called tool using agents. So this is the AI that can take actions and not just talk. So it autonomously can send emails, query databases, call APIs, other things. And by early 2025, so already last year, we started having looping agents. So the AI itself works autonomously in cycle. In each task, it doesn't just stop at the task, it picks up whatever is left to go and continues doing that. So you would ask it to build the feature, for example, and it would code, test, fix, repeat until it's done, navigating obstacles and troubleshooting its own errors that it finds along the way in a way that's almost scary because it feels very human how it navigates these problems that it encounters. And by late last year and early this year, we started having people orchestrating many of these simultaneously, multiple specialized AIs that coordinate, teams of agents, some of a specific team plan different things simultaneously, others research in parallel, and then one executes, for example. And as you can see here, the shift that's happening is that we started with AI as a tool, like a calculator or a computer, and now more and more we will treat it as a colleague. So this presentation we're still treating it as a tool, more or less, but we're starting to develop or co-develop a workflow together with it, right? And this might be something that you have with your own coworkers that you do together. So think about that. More sooner than you might expect, you might be treating the AI as a colleague, although I don't encourage you necessarily to treat it as a person. It's still a machine after all, so keep that in mind. So hopefully now you have a much better understanding of how to actually start implementing AI at your workplace and in your everyday tasks. If this was useful, then feel free to share it with your other coworkers that might benefit. If you want to see more content, then feel free to hit the subscribe button and keep an eye out for my AI playlist for new updates. And if your company and your colleagues wants this as a live workshop, then email me or reach out on LinkedIn. And I hope that if this video did help you, that you're able to do more rewarding and meaningful work as a result. See you in the next one.